the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, USA Today, NFL Wire site covering the Arizona Cardinals, with my co-host, Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, SB Nation's Arizona Cardinals site, and also one of the hosts of the original Draft Breakdown podcast, as we have episode 473. It's our second show of the week. This is our preview, picks, and predictions and props. Previews, picks, predictions, and props show for Week 6 as the Cardinals are set to take on the Los Angeles Rams. Seth, I think you feel this game is... this might be historic on this show. You are a little more optimistic about this game than I am. And I don't know how many times that has happened in the last 10 years.
Yeah, and I mean, it's one of those things that I'm not predicting a win by any means, but I do think that the Cardinals can potentially keep it close and potentially cover the now 7-point spread. It's moved from 6 early in the week to it's at 7 now on DraftKings. So, I think a lot of that's uncertainty, understandable from Vegas and the odds makers, but you also have to look at the fact that this is a very, very average Rams team. So those are kind of the two things playing against one another in this matchup, right?
That's a really good way to describe this squad, it feels like. Average. They're 2-3. They've got a win over the Seahawks. That's a good win. They were beating the doors off of the Colts 20-0. Then it took them overtime to win in Indy. And then they've lost games to the Eagles
and was
49ers.
Yeah. Was that a game that Anthony Richardson had to leave, or was he playing the whole game in that one?
He played the whole game in that one. He's
okay.
Like that was that game. He sort of just kind of took over and started making plays. The Rams have lost to the 49ers and the Eagles, which literally everyone so far has lost to the 49ers and Eagles. So there's no sadness in losing to them, but they also lost to the Bengals. It was a close one, though we now know that it looks like, unless it's just the Cardinals, that the Bengals appear to be what people thought they were. They just weren't there yet, and so a loss to the Bengals probably isn't anything to be ashamed of.
And not to create any excuse or anything of that nature, but the more that comes out from Cincinnati after that game, the more you're like, oh, that was a very good team that had played mostly bad, like we talked about, right? And then came in and won that game. And you saw in that situation where Joe Burrow is starting to move around and get healthy again, and that's the key to that Bengals season. So it's not at least right now, it doesn't look as bad as like the Giants loss. The Giants are just a terrible team. The Cardinals choked it away, but it does look like they just happened to be the team that
they got right on. Yeah,
that the Bengals caught the Cardinals at the right time as they were starting to get healthy. I mean, I don't know if you saw it, but for the highlights from Burrow at practice this week, he's working on his Patrick Mahomes throws. Like he's running full speed, sprinting and throwing off that right.
Man, the AFC's
leg.
Fun. That AFC's fun.
And so that's the thing, is like we were cautiously, maybe not even cautiously, we were overly hopeful, optimistic that it wouldn't be that week, that it wouldn't be against the Cardinals. And then, unfortunately, the injury to James Conner really just put that game into a spot where it was never going to happen. And you never know those things until it happens, right? And it happened, and it is what it is. And now, we're back to, okay, is this just a bad team? And like we talked about on Tuesday, and I highly recommend, you listen to all our shows, but Tuesday we discussed the reality of this roster and the importance these injuries play, and why even in a loss to the Bengals where there was a lot of unquestioned disappointment, it wasn't a bad loss, because in the end, when you're talking about not having, your best offensive player in James Conner now, and then losing probably your second best defensive player currently in Jalen Thompson. I would say maybe Kazier's their best, but Jalen Thompson their second best. Before halfway through the game, it is a less than optimal situation, and the Cardinals did well enough, to keep it close and have chances, but that failed fourth down, and then just the residual after that played into it. And I think it's weighing heavily on the minds of odds makers this week heading into the weekend, because as we'll discuss later, we don't have a lot of prop bets to give you on the Cardinals going into this game.
No, we don't. So I definitely have one, definitely Cooper Kupp. But let's look at first, as we've done the last few weeks in this show, is look at the Rams as a team, what they offer. Then we'll go into keys and matchups, and then in the last segment we will make our picks, predictions, and talk about the bets that you can make some money on, which injuries, I hate it when we recommend certain things and we're like, what the frick? James Conner should, over 58.5, that seemed like a lot, 6 carries, 46 yards, but then he gets hurt. That's just sadness. That's sadness. But average is a really good way to describe the Rams. Let's kind of look at the numbers. They are 15th in scoring, 16th in scoring defense. They do have a top 10 offensive unit in terms of yards, and are 15th in yards allowed. And so, they are a productive offense, which is what you should expect from Matthew Stafford and Sean McVay. But they are very average at scoring the ball. But I guess in a way we have to recognize the fact that Cam Akers basically fell off a cliff, and they stopped trusting him. They didn't have Cooper Kupp to start the season, and they're just now getting him back. And Stafford has been, I guess, has just been unimpressive.
Average. I mean, you said it to begin with. Average. I mean, he's completing barely 60% of his passes.
5 touchdowns, 5 interceptions.
I mean, just a very, very average season. And so, I talked to Evan Craig from Turf Show Times. I'm sure you're going to talk to somebody from Rams Wire, and it's the reality of that. You look at the games that they've lost, and those are where he's putting up his numbers, right? The loss to Philly, like you said, nothing to snub your nose at. 222 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks, but just barely under 57% completions. The loss to Cincy, sub 55% completions, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. And then the loss to San Francisco, just over or just under 62%, only 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. So, 4 touchdowns, 4 interceptions in the losses with a sub 57% completion percentage. That's not a recipe for winning football. And that's kind of where Stafford is at this point in his career. And it's not that he's a bad quarterback. It's just that he's like a better souped up, like more skills version of like a Josh Dobbs. And you might say, well, that's insulting to Stafford, who's been a borderline all-pro a number of times in his career. And it's not. What it is it's just the reality of where he is, a 35-year-old quarterback that's had a litany of shoulder issues throughout his career, just injuries. That's done everything that's kind of been needed from him, including winning a Super Bowl, right? And
yeah,
so
he had the magical year, that magical year in 2021. Yeah, that was everything that came together, and since then it's been underwhelming. They do have. I will say this. Without Cooper Kupp in the lineup, I thought they were going to be bad. And while the average is the way to describe them, they do have absolutely one huge bright spot, and that'd be rookie Puka Nacua. Rookie out of BYU, a guy actually that I liked as a receiver late in the draft, but he's far exceeded anything. Like, he's setting rookie records. He beat Anquan Bolden's first 4-game production in the NFL, and after 4 games had outproduced the 5-game record in terms of receiving yards and receptions. And so right now, through 5 games, he's got 46 catches for 572 yards and a pair of touchdowns. And then they got Cooper Kupp back, and so you wondered how that was going to turn out. Cooper Kupp came back. He had 8 catches for 118 yards, which is kind of what you would expect to see from him. And Puka still had 7 catches for 71 yards and a touchdown last week. Tutu Atwell, through the first 3 games of the season, was surprised, like, for a guy that had been an absolute bust for them for the first 3 years of his career. Absolute bust. Was super productive for the first 3 games, and I think he will probably basically disappear now, production-wise, with Kupp. And I think that their now duo of Kupp and Nacua will continue to produce, but everything else about that offense is pretty ordinary. Tyler Higbee only has 18 catches so far this year. Kyron Williams has 298 yards and is averaging 3.9 yards per carry, which is underwhelming. And so offensively, they're very meh. They're as the kids like to say, they're mid. They are mid offensively, except for Puka. And I guess you can say that they'll get volume yards in the passing game. It's just going to be a matter of how much they score.
Yeah, and that's the reality of who they are right now. And like you said, it's not something we expected. As long as Matthew Stafford was healthy, right? Like, we understood last year when he was out most of the season, them averaging, 18 points a game, but he only threw 300 passes. They were going with Baker Mayfield, John Wolford, Bryce Perkins. I mean, they had a litany of guys that they brought in, and this year through, like you said, 5 games, they're up. I mean, 22 points a game. That's the Stafford effect, but they're just kind of middle of the road and everything. It's crazy to look at, right? Yards on the season, they're 8th overall, and 5th in passing yardage, but 19th in touchdowns, 21st in rushing attempts, and 22nd in rushing yards. They're 23rd in yards per attempt rushing the ball, which is not great at all when a guy in Stafford is just playing a very average type of ball. But the big things for them on offense is that they're a little overwhelmed inside the box. They don't have a great offensive line anymore. They've never really solved the Andrew Whitworth situation, which, I mean, let's be honest, when Trent Williams leaves, it's not going to be easy to replace him for San Francisco. And while, Whitworth was never on the same level as a Trent Williams, he was really, really close to that level. And so, just to see their struggles, I don't think is shocking. I do think it is surprising how, again, we're going to use this word a lot, and we don't mean it to be demeaning by any stretch of the imagination, because when you talk about an average team, that's better than what the Arizona Cardinals are, without a doubt.
Yes.
But they're a team that they just, like I said, they don't pass block well. They're not great run blocking either. And so just overall as a unit, they've got a decent, top 15 quarterback still. And then from there, they've got these wide receivers who one's an anomaly and one's an, was Cooper Kupp an offensive player of the year one year? I mean,
oh my gosh, the Super Bowl year.
Yeah, he was. He was the offensive player of the year.
Real offensive player of the year. He set records. He was nearly in the absolute record book for everything, and he was the Super Bowl MVP. That year was ridiculous.
And then you mentioned Puka Nacua has been a revelation in terms of just being there. But you look at it, and I don't want to say we're not believers in terms of like PFF grades or anything like that, but you look at their top PFF grades and their top rated offensive lineman is a backup guard. Their top guy that's played all along is Rob Havenstein, who's been a really kind of solid player.
I would say per position he's probably their best lineman at he's the best quality that they have in terms of around the league at that position. I think he's a better right tackle than Alaric Jackson is a left tackle. I think he's a better right tackle than Joe Noteboom is a right guard, and I think he's a better right tackle than Coleman Shelton is a center. So he's kind of their best lineman in many ways. But he's not great. He's solid. He's the type of right tackle you'd love to have on your team.
Yeah, and so, but that's what it comes down to. I mean, so it's not a surprise that their running game is fine. I mean, it's not good. It's slightly below average, and it's whatever. And then Kyron Williams is averaging less than 4 yards per carry. The next guy on the roster in terms of yards is Matthew Stafford, which is not great.
That is not what you want with your old frail quarterback.
Right.
Rushing.
Ronnie Rivers hasn't really, I mean, we saw him in Arizona and not a shot by any means, but if you can't play in Arizona, it's really hard to understand why you would be there in LA. And, he's kind of just a guy that gets some snaps. Yeah. He doesn't play a ton. And like you said, Cam Akers was averaging 1.3 yards per carry.
He was supposed to be so much better.
And so they're a team that, unfortunately for the Cardinals, the Rams' strength is one of the Cardinals' biggest weaknesses, and it's the Rams throw the hell out of the ball, and the Cardinals, if they can't create blitzing situations, they probably can't stop Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. And so, that's a reality that we're going to have to face in this coming game, because even though the Rams are really average and they're a borderline bad team running the football, they throw the ball extremely well still, and the Cardinals really struggle covering wide receivers.
Defensively, they haven't been anything spectacular. In fact, Aaron Donald, I think, has it happened? Is that Aaron Donald is just ordinary good now? Is that what that is? He's not been a game wrecker this year. In 5 games, he's got 2.5 sacks and 20 tackles. He's definitely, there's production, but the J.J. Watt effect. Like when J.J. Watt, he fell off the cliff and then he got hurt all the time, and then he was solid in that last year. But now he's just an ordinary productive, like an ordinary good rather than otherworldly dominant.
Well, and you look at it, I mean, it was one of those situations where it was bound to happen. I mean, 31-year-old, first time he wasn't an all-pro since his rookie season. So from 2015 to 2021, a span of 7 consecutive seasons, he was an all-pro defensively. He won 3 Defensive Players of the Year. And so when you just look at what he did, and I mean, he had a career low in sacks. Yeah, he only played in 11 games too. So, it's just the body, the old cliche of father time's undefeated is real for a reason. And, even a guy like Aaron Donald, who at year 30 was third in defensive player of the year voting and an all pro first team and a pro bowler and, was still a wrecking ball and a menace. You look at that 2021 season, it took and again, it's not a negative thing. It's not saying anything bad about him, but it probably took everything out of him to win that Super Bowl at age 30, 3.5 sacks, 4 tackles for loss, in that run. And now he, age 31, he starts to have injury issues. Age 32, like you said, now he's just a really good player. Again, and not to take anything away or overstate anything, but the reality is he'd 100% be the best defensive player on the Cardinals team,
yes,
like today. But you look at the other thing with him, and that's really, really interesting. And it's percentage of snaps, and he's playing since his age 25 season. This is the least amount percentage wise of snaps he's playing in games. He's at below 85% for the first time since that 2016 season. And that's where it's at more than anything, is that, you look at all of those seasons, and I go back to 2021, he played over 1,000 defensive snaps at age 30. 90% of the teams. I don't think people realize how absurd that is. That happens
for that position.
Right.
Oh my gosh.
Right. I mean, to play over 1,000 snaps, to play 90% of snaps, you're talking safeties, corners, and maybe high-end like Fred Warner type linebackers. The rest of them are usually below 85%. And he did that in 2021 and was on pace to do it again in 22 before the injuries crept in. He played 89% of his available snaps in 2022. And so this year to only be at 83%, and I say that very jokingly, to only be at 83%, it tells you that there is the reality he's slowing down, why his production is slowing down. But it also is the reality that when he steps on the field on Sunday, he's probably still the best or second best player on the field. And by the way, the second best is Cooper Kupp. So
yeah,
it's not like,
and I think what we have to recognize as well, the talent drop off that the Rams have suffered. They don't have elite talent at every level now. They have their defensive line. They've got Aaron Donald. They have unproven edge guys. They have Ernest Jones. He's a solid inside linebacker, but it's not the same. Their great corners have disappeared, and their safeties are. So their defensive talent is simply not what it was.
No, but it's also one of those things that we've talked about with the Cardinals and the reality of going for it, right? And so we're seeing the reality of going for it the year after, or I guess technically 2 years after, when the Cardinals did it in 2021. And now you're seeing the Rams, they went for it in 2021, and you're kind of seeing the reality of it, right? They went 5-12 last year. They're probably going to win 6, maybe 7 games this year. Just with their schedule, they play obviously similar schedules to the Cardinals. So they have the Cardinals, then they have the Steelers, and then they go to Dallas, then Green Bay. And then on the back half of their schedule, they still have, the Browns, the Ravens, the Saints, and the 49ers again. And so you look at it, you're like, okay, where do they get 6 more wins? How do they get to 8 wins? And any given Sunday is a thing, but and so even if you give them 2 wins against the Cardinals, that's only 4. So you got to still find 4 more wins on that schedule for a team, again, that's really, really average. And so all those things, are just a reality of where they are, because like you said, their talent has been removed, and that's what happens when you don't have a first round pick since 2016.
Right. Coming up next on the Rise Up Secret podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's talk about keys for the Cardinals and matchups that we're looking at. That's coming up next on Rise Up C-Red. We're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web, talking about the Cardinals and the Rams in Week 6. Can the Cardinals even compete if Cooper Kupp goes off the way Brandon Ayuk did, the way that Jamar Chase did, and so on and so forth? Do they even have a chance because they had two guys absolutely go off against San Francisco, with Christian McCaffrey scored the 4 touchdowns, and Brandon Ayuk 6 catches for 148 yards. Last week it was nearly 200 yards from Jamar Chase and the 3 touchdowns. I guess they can't have anybody just absolutely go off. I guess keep a receiver under. Keep a player. Don't let anyone go for more than 150 total yards. Is that what we're at right now?
I mean, I think that's the reality. I think you have to look at it, and you have to say that you're hoping that Nakua and Kupp combined stay under 225 yards. And then you throw in Kyron Williams, and that trio has to be under 300 yards total for them to have a shot. Because, if Kyron Williams is going towards that 70-plus yard game, probably means that they were up and now they're just running the ball, right? Which is not what they do well. But
No.
if you get ahead, it's really easy to not do it well and still do it a lot and still have some success. So, and that's a sad statement to make.
And it looks like we're primarily probably going to see Antonio Hamilton against Cooper Kupp, who is so good out of the slot. Jalen Thompson's probably not playing this week. That's the guess as of right now. Which means
not a huge deal, right? I mean, we saw what happens when.
And so that means Antonio Hamilton in the slot, and that means Marco and Keitrell will be there to guard Puka and Atwell. Now, Atwell, I don't know what we can expect, but if Marco ends up on Atwell, we saw the Giants receiver, I don't remember his name, the speedy guy, get behind him a couple of times.
Jalen Hyatt.
Jalen Hyatt got behind him a couple of times, and that could happen. And so my key matchups to watch is, well, one, you've got to watch Hamilton versus Kupp, and you've got to whoever is covering Puka, whether that's Clark, whether that's Wilson. I haven't looked. Where does Puka normally line up? Does he line up on the right side or left side?
Well, let's take a look where his receiving. They're pretty multiple with how they do things.
Yeah.
So let's see here. Snaps by position and detailed. So he's been in the slot 110 times. Slot left, about. Sorry, I'm doing math in my head. He's about a 50-50 split on the slot left and right. And then he's a slight lean in when he lines up wide to the right side. 131 to 78.
That'll be more Keitrell.
Yeah, so 131 to 78 as a wide receiver, like out wide receiver on the right side, and virtually the same in those 110. Yeah, it actually is a 50-50 split now that I'm doing the math of the slot stuff. So he lines up, but that's the thing you also have to remember is, like, in the slot, he lines up whether it's wide in the slot, middle in the slot, or almost as like a slot back / H back. They line him up all over, and that's one of the things McVay does. And that's one of the things we've seen Drew Petzing start doing, right? And one of the big complaints of the Cliff or Cliff Kingsbury era was the lack of using alignments or motion or anything like that to create mismatches for your star players. Well, McVay's kind of the complete opposite. And it's like, no, this is what I'm going to do anytime I can to make sure that my guy gets in a situation to be successful. So we'll see how it works out because, you've got a group of corners who have not stopped good wide receivers, especially the last 3 games. And now you're facing potentially, or sorry, the last 2 games, excuse me, the last 2 games. And now you're facing potentially the best duo that you've faced thus far. Because, I mean, if you think about it, Debo had a really good game, but he was used in multiple ways. I mean, he had what? Only
they held him pretty low, but he was also hurt going into that game.
Yeah. And so he didn't have a ton of yards in that game. And so that's what I'm saying. This is probably the game where they're facing the best duo they faced. Not necessarily the best receiver, because Ayuk and Chase have been putting up massive seasons, but having Nakua and Kupp stresses the defense in a different way, because even if you are able to slow down one, it's really hard to see them slowing down both. And so that's why we said, like, you might say, keep them under 225 total yards between the two of them. It's like, no, that's being gracious, because I could see them. I mean, we're literally saying we could see them going for 300 yards between the two of them. Like, that would not, we wouldn't be like, I cannot believe that happened. You and I would be like,
yeah, I suppose.
Yeah. There's a reason they won, right? Like, because that happened.
Well, I'm, they've got to be able to do something with the run game, and that's going to be extremely hard. We anticipate it will be Keontae Ingram and Emari DeMercado. I wonder how much Rondale Moore is involved in the run game this week. And
I think with the way that, and again, these are just kind of broad statistics, so we're not diving deep into the recesses here by any means, but you look at what they've given up rushing total wise, and 85 to the Seahawks in game 1. The Seahawks haven't really established the dominant running game that many thought that they could have with Kenneth Walker and who's the guy they just drafted, that we both like, Zach Charbonnet this year. I mean, both those guys combined were less than what James Conner had done this year. So, I mean, it's not surprising. And then the next game against maybe the best running team in the NFL, the San Francisco 49ers, the 49ers put up 159 rushing yards. So you're like, okay. The Bengals offense as a whole was struggling. They only put up 67 rushing yards, but last 2 games with quarterbacks that could run better than Josh Dobbs. So I don't want anybody to think I'm saying that they can't, or that Josh Dobbs can run like these, but the Colts had 133 rushing yards and again, they were down 20-0 and had 133 rushing yards. And then the Eagles, 159 rushing yards. So there's yards to be had. I mean, they've kept one team under 300 yards all season. That was game 1 against the Seahawks, where, again, the Seahawks just didn't look prepared or anything like that. In their wins, 180 and 329 yards. So, just about 250 yards from scrimmage. And then in their losses, you're talking they're getting 375 yards a game put up on them. So it's very much a defense, a bipolar defense, if you will, and a defense that they live off of being able to move the ball and long drives, sustained drives that are fueled by their, very timely and intricate passing game. But their defense has not been good. I mean, there's just, the only way we can put it is that they've just not been good. And so how do they stop a Cardinals offense that is slightly below average, would you say, or would you say they're bad now? Like, what would be your opinion?
That's a good question.
They're 19th in points. They're still 6th in rushing yards, but the main guy is now gone. So I mean, it's just the question becomes, can they? I mean, because they've been average. They're 15th, 16th in yardage. The Cardinals, very average. Nothing wrong with that. But when now you're talking about their top two weapons, obviously they haven't had Murray all year, and now James Conner is out. So can they take advantage of a poorish run defense and the ability to throw the ball? Because, like you said, the Rams pass rush, especially that ferocious pass rush, is not what it was even last year, but definitely not 2 years ago.
Right. If the Cardinals need to make Matthew Stafford uncomfortable. There's no way around that. If they don't get pressure, he will pick them apart. Even at that, that's kind of the key. So you look at the matchups of the outside linebackers. So your Demicheji, Gardeck, Collins, Cam Thomas combination against their tackles of Alaric Jackson, Rob Havenstein. How do they do? They've got to win a lot of those. They probably need a minimum of 3 sacks. Not necessarily from those guys, but in particularly those guys, because that's we can't expect much from the interior defenders with where they're at. But that's another super key, and absolutely they can't turn the ball. They can't turn the ball over. So Josh Dobbs has got to be much more careful with the football this week, and in turn, what that requires them to get out to a lead. That they have to score points early, otherwise you're asking Dobbs to bring them back, which
sounds awful.
It's not ideal. Like you get in, like they did it. They came back from 10 points down to be 4 points up, but then like immediately gave up the lead, and then that was that pretty much. And so there's so many things. Like, they can't turn the football over. They've got to find some way to produce in the running game. And I think they need big games from both Hollywood and Michael Wilson. I don't think there's any way around it.
Yeah, and I thought it was cool that whether it was on Dobbs or Petzing or whoever the situation was, I thought it was cool that he kind of owned the fact that they didn't get the ball out enough to Michael Wilson, right? Like they said, that's on us. And so, we'll see how this plays out and things of that nature. They have to, like you said, you have to get production out of Wilson, Brown, whether it's Ertz or Swaim or whoever it is. They all have to they all have to find a way to get the ball and get healthy against this, again, I don't want to say bad because they're not bad, but really kind of average Rams defense. But with how they were expecting to play this season, I don't know if that's plausible without James Conner. So it's going to be huge for this team to see where they're at without James Conner.
Coming up next on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, episode of Cardinals Talk on the Web. It's time for the segment where we make our picks and predictions and the prop bets we like. That's coming up next on Rise Up C-Red. We're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, episode of Cardinals Talk on the Web. Predictions and picks and the things that we expect to happen. I am not optimistic in this game, but I also, the more I think about it, because of how ordinary the Rams have been, I think it's going to be not a lovely game. And if I had to pick a prediction, I think the Cardinals will struggle offensively. And I think the passing game will hum for the Rams, but they're not a great red zone team. And so they will pick up yards, but might not score. Like they might turn the ball over once or twice. They've been prone to the turnovers so far this year. Stafford's got 5 interceptions in 5 games so far this season, but I don't think there's any way. I don't think there's any doubt that we're going to get a big game for Cooper Kupp, and you have to hope that he's the only one, rather than having be both Kupp and Nakua. But I think this game ends up being a 10-point loss. I think it's a 10, 11-point loss. I think I'll say 27-17.
Yeah, and I think that we're going to see a backdoor cover similar to what we should have seen in San Francisco. I don't think there's ever a doubt, especially in the second half, that the Rams are going to win this game. But I do think the Cardinals can find a way to get to 21 and make it a 27-21 game, cover that now 7-point spread, and see what happens. But like Jess said, I wouldn't be shocked if it was 27-10 and then the Cardinals score late either, because just how they have not fared or played particularly well the last couple of games, and now you're without James Conner.
Yeah. So no James Conner, no Jalen Thompson. Now they should get Jonathan Ledbetter back, and maybe Keontae Ingram will
surprise us. Yeah,
maybe, because he does got something. He's a guy that's got a little bit of juice to him. He does have some bursts, and so there'd be something. Now, do I expect that? No, I don't expect that at all.
No.
And so, how many sacks? I think they get. I think the pass rush will get 3 sacks. Maybe a turnover, but I bet the Cardinals turn the ball over twice.
Yeah, and I can see that. I mean, Dobbs had his first 2 interceptions last week. The fact that Dobbs is outplaying Matthew Stafford statistically is just a baffling situation to me. Like, it's really complicated for me to understand how that's even plausible. But the way that Stafford's played this year and the way that Dobbs, played in that 3-game stretch was impressive. So we'll see how it works and looks and all of that. But right now, yeah, I'm with you. I don't expect this to be a clean game from Dobbs, but there's no props yet. We're both, this is a Thursday. We're both looking into it. By the way, this is not one of those games where we're like hammer the interception for the opposing quarterback, even though it is relatively even money. It's not, I don't know if the juice is good enough to take it for Stafford, because he's thrown 5 interceptions, but can the Cardinals cause enough havoc to force him to throw 1? That's a bigger question.
Yeah, that's not a bad one at -105. That's fair. That's even money, more or less. I think the one.
Even.
Yeah, I think the one that you just have to say that's a lock, and it's not. It's they're the 50-50 odds. It's -115, but Cooper Kupp over 86.5 yards. Yeah, I think that one's easy. That one's easy to me, because
and Jess and I never really go with the idea of like, hey, do this site instead of this site. But I will say DraftKings has that same number over 86.5, but at -105. So again, the juice,
that's your better value there.
Yeah, the juice is just a little better in that. The other thing, and I mentioned it in our podcast on Tuesday, DraftKings has a bet plus 200 for Kupp and Nakua to combine for 185 yards. I don't necessarily see how that doesn't happen. I mean, we're not saying that it's a lock by any means, but it just feels really easy to see both of them get about Kupp at about 100 and Nakua about 90, and like it wouldn't surprise either of us.
And they did it last week because Kupp had 118, Puka had 71. The other one I'm looking at that I think will certainly be one that I think we get is the longest passing completion. It's set at 37.5 yards for Matthew Stafford based on what we've seen over the last couple of weeks. I think that's a safe bet at minus 110.
Yeah, that seems like a really safe bet, and I think that's better on your side. I think mine was 115.
Yeah, because they have it at
Oh,
minus
it is
110.
110. Okay,
Okay,
so
because it's minus 120 for the under, which is interesting. Are we going kicks this time? Because I think like it's at 6.5 for Prater.
Seems like a lot right now.
Yeah, and especially if I'm thinking, because I'm thinking 17 points. That's not going to get in there. So if you think that the Cardinals will struggle offensively, under 6.5 at minus 120 is not a bad play, certainly.
What about Brett Maher, the Rams kicker? His over point extras is 2.5. You and I both think that they score 27. That would mean 3 touchdowns, 2 field goals. His kicking points is over 7.5, but over 2.5 PAT seems fairly reachable.
Yeah.
At plus 110 as well. So that's plus money.
That's over there. That's a better than the line over here at BetMGM, which is over 2.5 is plus 105. So it'll get you a few extra dollars over DraftKings than at BetMGM. They're not paying. Neither one of them is paying us. So whatever. It's fine. Hey, if sponsors out there, FanDuel, DraftKings, any of y'all, hit us up. We will advertise your site.
Something we did one game against the Cowboys, and then we both crapped the bet on it. But since there's not a ton of Cardinals centric this week with all the unknowns, especially with the prop bets, I like the Cardinals point bands 11 to 20 and then 21 to 30. 11 to 20 is plus 155, 21 to 30 is plus 160. So a $10 bet on that 11 to 20 would win you, 1550, a 20, or a $5 bet on that 21 to 30 would get you $8, not a ton of money, but it would basically guarantee that you break even. And if you think that the Cardinals score less than 11 points, so 0 to 10, it's plus 475. I wouldn't if you were like, oh, the Cardinals only scored 10, I'm not going to be aghast. But if you think that the Cardinals score more than 30, put money on it because it's plus 600. I would be shocked. I tell you, if they score 31 points. Like Jess and I would come back on this and be like, we don't know what happened right now, but something crazy happened. So you've talked about it before, those points bands, that's where some fun money can be had, I think. And you can kind of hedge where you're at worst breaking even or making a little bit of money on that. I like those bets there, but it's just, this is a tough one, man. Let's be honest. Like, we don't know what to expect now without James Conner. At least you had an idea of what this offense was for 4.5 games with James Conner, where you were like, oh, they're very competent, if underwhelming, not explosive, kind of plodding, but that's not shocking. Like we knew that's who they were coming in, and now you take that Connor element out of everything and you go, I have no idea, man. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know who's going to fill in. I don't know who's going to play well. I don't know who's going to play poorly. Like, none of it makes any sense. So don't ask me, because I'm kind of learning with you at this point, right? Like, that's kind of where we're at.
Yeah.
In this one, because it just hasn't been something we expected. Like, we did not expect them to be bad by any means, but all of a sudden we don't know how they're going to react when you're talking about losing the most important player on the offensive side of the ball.
And how we declare that they're a good bad team. I don't think they're a good bad team probably right now.
Yeah, and it's, again, but that's not surprising.
No. Like, you lose your top defensive lineman. You lose Buddha. You lose Jalen Thompson. You don't have Kyler Murray back. Then you lose James Conner. That was inevitable. Like, they're playing with there's intrigue with some of the guys that are playing, but no, there's.
Well, and it's funny to me that, and I'm interested in your take in this, because even after Sunday, while the Cardinals fans are, I think, a little worse for wear after that one, the national media, like, nobody's like, oh, we were wrong about Jonathan Gannon. Like, the narrative and the idea still is that they are on the right track. And so do you think it's just that the fans, and partially, you and I were on this side, do you think it was just one of those situations where we probably overly excited, and I'm not blaming the media or anything like that, but like the fans portion of this, we were maybe a little too enthusiastic and overexcited about their potential to beat the Bengals, and now we're going back to, oh man, like we overdid this just a little bit.
Well, I will say I'm guilty of this. I've been guilty of this every year since like 1991.
Right. No, and that's the thing is, like, we go back to our picks even. Neither one of us think that they're going to win this game. Neither one of us do. I just have the idea that they can once again backdoor cover their way into something in this game. But I don't necessarily know that they're, like you said, they're a good team or anything of that nature at this point.
And with that, let's go ahead and wrap up this show. I don't know, as of right now, I don't have a Rams person lined up for this weekend, so this might be the last show we have. At minimum, we will be back next week to talk about how the Cardinals did against the Rams. But if something comes up, hopefully we can get another show. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. This is episode 473, I think. And we'll be back again soon. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up, See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be red, see red, and of course, Rise up, see red.